All right, everybody, we are live for our next Game Dev Roundtable here on the Game Wisdom channel. Every month, our panel picks a topic regarding game design or game dev, and we spend a good hour or so discussing it. And we're always looking for questions from our chat here. Unfortunately, Jack couldn't make it this time, but we have a returning guest, and I'm going to let our panel introduce each other. So, once again, we'll start with Tomo and work our way around.
Hello, everybody. My name is Tomo Moriwaki. I've been a game designer for a really long time, roughly 24 years. Probably my claim to fame is being the creative director of Spider-Man 2, but I've been working on stuff the whole time, and I'm happy to be here.
All right, and to Tim.
Hello world, my name is Tim Ruswick, and I am the person that does game dev stuff around the internet. I run Game Dev Underground, and I'm making a game called Battleborn Tactics, which you can find on Steam, and I'm excited to be here today.
And hello, everybody. I'm Sharky Shark. I do podcast here and on my channel as well, Nexus Games, and do game dev. Currently working on Neon Continuum, if I can get the name, and trying to hopefully not fail with that one. It's going to be really hard since it's multiplayer, but it's looking really good so far, I think.
Yeah. It's great to have everyone on. And again, Tim, it's a pleasure to have you back on. How is everything going since we last spoke? It seems like, like 3 years since our last time we actually had a chance to speak.
It does. It's fantastic, man. I took some time off. I went in nature. I hung out, went some camping, some stuff without digital devices, and I'm ready to get back to making games. I've actually been making a lot of paper games lately to stay away from the computer. So I'm ready to talk about games again, I think.
Maybe the future topic will be going off the grid and designing a video game.
Everybody in my community is obsessed with this idea called Camp Jam, which is a game jam while camping, where we bring a bunch of components and everybody makes a game. And ever since I mentioned that on stream, no one will let me forget it.
It's awesome.
You could totally go to a cabin in the woods for Halloween. There we go.
That's an idea.
Nothing bad will ever happen there.
No.
Oh, you wish something bad would happen. That was me as a kid. I'm like, oh, I hope something scary happens, and it's like nothing happens.
All right. But we have once again another topic to discuss, and for this month, we're going to be discussing pricing a video game or putting a price on design. It is a very hard thing to do, despite people maybe thinking it's a little bit easy, especially from the consumer side. But I believe this all came up when I think Tomo and I last spoke. I think this was something that we talked about, I think, on our previous, just like our design chat, which we have another one coming up this week. But for our panel here, we have 3 developers who have each put out games in the past. And I guess to start with, I just want to go around, and we'll start with Sharky and then work our way around this time. How did you think about putting a price on your game, like in terms of research, in terms of what the design was, or even just what you wanted to get out of it?
Man, that's a topic and a half of the. So I did lots and lots of research. I researched all kinds of similar games to mine, researched a lot of things, and when I was going through and doing my research, I noticed a pattern that most games of my genre specifically, but I found out this actually applied wider, were all $15 or more. And I was comparing their quality to what I thought my quality was, kind of thing, and trying to evaluate where I should go. And after all that, there wasn't any real answers. It was just, here's things, take them as you will, kind of thing. And in the end, I just decided to go with the $15 price tag because it felt the most right. And it was really an arbitrary decision. Like, there was not much behind it. other than I seen one GDC during that time that said basically if you price your game under $15, your odds of success go down drastically. But he also said that your game has to be worth $15 to sell for $15 at the same time. So you can't just, price it, at $15 and have it, be a low quality game and have it sell kind of thing. It has to be actually worth that money and probably worth way more than that money in reality.
All right. I do want to elaborate on that one after the whole group, but go ahead, Tomo.
Do you remember who said that?
I do not off the top of my head.
Okay.
Because I super don't agree with that statement, by the way.
Yeah, and again, we'll probably be talking about that as our next question as well, in terms of what does it mean to have that value. But we'll move on to Tim next.
Alex says he thinks games should be free, so we should talk about that too. So I have experience in marketing, and one of the things that I did for clients before was we would do price tests. So one of the things that I have actually helped clients do in the past is determine the price for their product and when it would convert best. And the way that we did this was we took landing pages that have different price points on them, and then we would buy ads and send them to these different landing pages and split test them. And sometimes, for whatever reason, one would just convert better, and we would usually go with that price. Sometimes it was the higher price, ironically. When it came time to price my game, I did an extremely scientific method that I had honed over years and years of work, and I basically just said, I feel like it should be $10. So that's how I came to my price. But I don't think there is a science to it. I do think most people price their game too low. I think Philophobia would have sold just as well at 15. And so, yeah, it's weird. It's a weird little subject because like there is a point in which you will decrease sales, but there's also like a happy medium of like a higher price won't necessarily turn away a customer.
All right. And over to Tomo.
So when we put Epic Tavern at $29.99, which is high, the logic or the data that we gathered that convinced us to make that choice was in that period of time a large chunk of indie kind of artisanal sort of games were coming out of the woodwork. They were really trying to set themselves apart from like the sub $10 games, and everyone was hating on the $50+ games, at least on Steam, right? A big chunk of the market kind of moved into this like, well, I'm getting really, really great value out of these games that are costing practically nothing through Valve, and but at the same time, there's like a growth. I think the theory is that there was like a growth in people's interest in supporting indie developers as well. But yeah, so we chose that price point because we saw a cluster of titles that were in the same vibe as we were trying to shoot for with Epic Tavern. And then part of the idea, that was also a period of time when you saw Planetary Annihilation become very controversial in its early access period being $80.
Oh, yes.
And everybody's like losing their minds, but it worked out really good for them. And they can always sell, they can always do sales and reduce the price from that point forward. But in the logic of Steam, you cannot increase your price ever again. And so that was kind of at least the underlying reasoning. There was also articles at that time that Valve released saying how from the broad totality of their analysis that pricing was purely fluid. That claim is insane, right? That it doesn't matter what you price the game at, you'll make the same amount of money, is what they're saying. You make it cost more, you sell less units, but you get the same amount of money. You make it cost less, you sell more units, but you make the same amount of money. Now, that is generally true, though, of the whole body of Steam titles, extraordinary and very much a piece of information we need to keep in mind. But from a genre to genre perspective and specific case perspective, it is insane.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And on our previous Sunday show, we were talking about micro games, and we said what you just said, Tomo, about how you can, say your price whatever you want, but you can never go higher. Like if you want your game to retail at $200, you can do that, but you can never say, "Here's my $20 game, and I'm going to make it now $30 after launch." Early access games can certainly go up in price, and we've seen that, but once you're officially at retail, that price is etched in stone until the end of time.
Yeah, that's stressful too.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I have a story that I'm not going to share who, but a friend of mine put the wrong price in on accident right out the gates. And then you can't change it for a month, by the way, either, so you can't even change it down.
Yeah.
I think I know who you may be talking about, because I think I saw a game that did just that. I think this was late 2019.
And they weren't happy.
Mm-hmm. So, for the next question, do you guys want to talk about should games be free, or that comment about, getting $15 or getting your money's worth out of the game?
I don't think anybody on this panel thinks games should be free. I feel like that was a troll comment.
Yeah.
To be honest. If they're dead serious and they want us to go in detail, I feel like they should say in the chat again.
Yeah.
Well, I meant there's free to play, which is not free, but.
Mm-hmm. So then, while we're waiting to see if they do say that, let's talk about what that means about getting your money's worth out of the game, because I think this is even harder than putting a price on a game, because as Shark and I are well aware, I'm sure you guys as well, there are a lot of games being released these days, and it's getting harder and harder to find the time. And time and money, I think, are often, conflated together when we have these kinds of talks. Because when we think 30, 40 years ago, you buy a game for $60 to $70, that's your game for the next month, 2 to 3 months, maybe a little less than that. Today, I can buy a game for whether it's $5, whether it's $50. I may only play that game for an hour or two before moving on to something else. And it's harder and harder to justify spending a lot of time on a game, and in return, harder to justify spending that money. And I mean, anyone watching us right now knows about the trend of sales these days, and how I don't have to buy your game at $60. I can wait 4 months. I could get it for $30. I could even get it for $20. I mean, I got, Doom Eternal, Mortal Kombat 11, pick any, award-winning game that came out in the last year or two. I probably got for 50% or less in less than a year of its release.
I think one thing that's often not mentioned when we talk about pricing and stuff is kind of what Josh alluded to, but we assume that pricing is like a constant in a world where people are constant, and there's many different groups of people. There's many individuals, right? You could argue that everybody's their own person, but like some people are very price sensitive, and some people are not. So a $60 game, there are people that, whatever the newest game that came out this week is, they're going to pick it up for $60 because they have the income and they don't care, right? And they play it for an hour and then they go trade it into GameStop and get their $3. But then there are people that are like, well, no, I don't need to play that right now. I can wait for 2 years until it's, $5. And that's what they do. And that's fine. And so like, I think we often forget when we're talking about subjects as global as pricing that like there are lots of individual people, and that these people look at these problems from different angles. And it's important to kind of take most of these viewpoints into account when you're dealing with stuff like this.
Yeah, and we have the rare exception of that to Factorio, to where they never go on sale ever, and that's a really
RimWorld
interesting.
rarely goes on sale as well.
Grand strategy games in particular, like war games and those kinds of titles, rarely go on sale as well. And yeah, I think to further continue on Tim's point, the consumer is such a big factor. I think we spoke about this on our Sunday show, that ultimately the consumer is going to be the one who's going to dictate the value. If you say your game at $60 and nobody buys it, well, the consumer is basically telling you you price your game too high. But then, of course, on the flip side, you price your game at, I don't know, $1. Do you know if people were willing to spend $15, $20 on that same title? And it's a question that unfortunately you're never going to know the answer to it once you put your game at that price, because you've set that precedent going forward.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if ever I'm wildly successful, I guarantee you I will run experiments and I'll give everyone data.
I'm with you, dude. That's what I'm trying to do.
Because the part of, I mean, I do have theories on what makes for the kind of game you want to sell for small amounts of money, not just the kind of game that has a small budget. Because you could have a small budget game with the right promise, probably charge a lot of money for, and people would be totally fine with that.
Yeah.
It's all this kind of weird sort of emotional math that comes into play there. I think one of the essential things in terms of the cheaper titles is to go, I'm going down on price because I don't want the consumer to get too caught up in the details, certain details about my product. The core promise makes it through. The core promise seems interesting enough, and I want them to just auto buy. I just want them to go like, yeah, sure, whatever. Yeah, that looks good enough, and the price is low enough that I'm not thinking about it. I'm in.
Of course, art aesthetics plays a lot into the how much your game feels what it's worth to consumers.
Well, that's the thing is, yeah, beauty has no price tag. And so as beauty scales, more people will think that it's very valuable, whatever that even means, right? They won't be able to tell you $50, $40, $30, but you could increase the price and then they'd be willing to say yes.
Yeah. And we've seen a lot of indie games. Again, like Shark and I, when we look at games for Sunday, that there are games that have some amazing aesthetics and art, and when we play them, the gameplay doesn't really quite keep up. The example we always go back to is the Lazy Bear games, stuff like Punch Club, Swag and Sorcery, with the Graveyard Keeper, games like that. That they look so damn impressive, but we always find their gameplay lacking. And as to what Tomo just said, it's very hard to like put a price on art. Like as you said, like what's the $30 masterpiece versus the $50 masterpiece? And Alex in chat brought up a point about Hollow Knight, and Hollow Knight I think is another really good example. Again, like that weird price disparity. That you look at this game, you look at screenshots and videos of it, it looks damn well impressive. And then when you scroll down, you see a price tag of $15. And like what Tim said, that, it's getting the price at a point where people don't even think about that, the price isn't really that barrier. And like we said, like we could easily equate this to free-to-play games. Like there are people who will play a free-to-play game, and the second they see, any kind of grind, any kind of stuff, they're like, here, just take my money. I don't want to deal with this. Move on. And then there's people like me who's like, $1 for all this stuff? I don't know. I'm fine with grinding for the next, 2 to 3 weeks. I'm keeping my dollar. And again, it's very hard because you never really know what games are going to succeed in terms of their price. Like we've said, like with like Epic Tavern being priced at $30, Disco Elysium was priced at $40, Shadow Tactics, I think, was either $30 or $40 at launch. And those games, like with Disco Elysium, like, I thought that game was just not going to do well. A $40 indie game. And, again, it blew up out of nowhere like that.
I think this is interesting. Phalophobia, my game, I think, is an interesting example of this because it's $11.99 on Steam right now. But when I sold it, when it launched, I sold a Founders Edition that was it was $66. $66 plus $30 international shipping if you're international. So some people paid $100 for my $12 indie game. And it's interesting because you're like, you know, if you're price sensitive, you're looking at like, what? Somebody would pay $100? What is wrong with them? But with the way that like with the way that I talked about it, the way that the game came about, and it's an emotional journey. I poured heart and soul. It's emotions. It's got all this stuff, and it's got all this symbolism. It's got all this deep, dark stuff. It's about depression. It's about recovery. It's about hell. It's got, you know, all this stuff. If that resonates with you, the price becomes less and less important. Like the more and more it resonates with you, right? And especially if you're not price sensitive to begin with, then it's like that doesn't even matter. You didn't even look at that. You're like, yeah. And then you add on other factors, like some people might have just wanted to support me, right? They might have got value out of my videos and stuff like that too. So this is what makes it such a complicated problem, because I think we'd all love to say, okay, well, this is the right price, but it's not universal like that. It's weird and gray and moldable depending on scenarios.
And I think a specific detail I want to just blast out a little bit louder is that your product should not be sold according to what its value is to a perceived audience member. It should be sold entirely according to what people are willing to spend for it and what you need to do with your price to try to get the best results. So it's worth noting, if you're going to charge a crap load of money for something, one of the things that's going to do to a consumer is it's going to make them pay a little more attention. It's going to make them see it as more valuable. They're going to want to maybe look for proof. That'll chase away a lot of people. But maybe one thing you get for sure, and this was the context of the Planetary Annihilation at $80 for early access, because I know the guy. He's like, I just wanted people to be damn sure of what they're getting, and that I don't want people to buy this and then go like and not be serious about it.
Yeah, and
the developers of Eco did something similar to where they were listing their price quite high. I can't remember what it was originally. I think it was $100 originally on their website and everything. It wasn't even on Steam at that point, because they only wanted the most committed and hardcore in there to play the game at first, so that in the most broken, buggy state kind of thing, it's only got the people who are there for the long haul that really want to see the game come to its best light kind of thing and give the best kinds of feedback and everything, so that they could take it and shape it into, you know, what would be acceptable for Steam, and then release it into Steam early access for a lot cheaper. I can't remember how much it released into Steam early access. I think it was like $30, something like that. I can't remember.
I'm sorry, what game was I tried? Did you say Eco?
Eco.
How do you spell that?
ECO.
ECO. I thought it was Ico, like the other one.
Did that come out on Steam? If it did, I really want to get it.
Yeah, a long time ago. I don't think it's actually release, but it's in early access.
Yeah,
I know one of the developers on the team.
I need to put in for that one. Yeah, and I think what Tim was saying about kind of like that emotional value is kind of what Will is saying in chat as well. It's that he feels like this will become the age of the niche. That the games that are going to do well, they have to resonate with each individual person. So that, like we said, that it doesn't really become a matter of price. It's a matter of, this game speaks to me because of X, Y, and Z. I don't care, what you're charging. $2, $40, $8, whatever. This game checks off all my boxes, and I want to play this. And
which has a lot to do with timing, because things, society changes and evolves, and things become popular and unpopular kind of thing.
I remember when I was looking at Stellaris, it was like a big, massive grand strategy game, and I was trying to figure out like whether it was a good fit for me. And I love like star games and anything space exploration and all that stuff. But for me to figure out that game, it took me a 90-minute YouTube tutorial. Okay, 90 minutes just to figure out what the hell I'm supposed to do. And so it's games like that if I'm a player that's willing to sit through a 90-minute YouTube tutorial to figure out this game, I'm probably also willing to pay a higher price for it, right? I'm invested in this. I want this. I like this. So I agree with the niche as far as like it's a better fit with the target market, right? Like I'm extra invested in this than someone else. Someone else would have lost interest after 5 minutes, but I went through the 90-minute process that it took. So it was a good fit for me.
Yeah, and again, like going back to like grand strategy games in general, like they rarely go on sale because they know that if I'm building a World War II game based on this specific conflict with this specific faction, if somebody's going to buy that game, that's a game they're going to play. Like they're not going to be buying 20 different war games like that. And it's always been very interesting. Again, there's definitely, I think, a discussion we had about, again, like onboarding and bringing new people into a genre, but I think that will probably be beyond the scope for our roundtable today. Let's see. Before we go to this next question, I guess any thoughts from you, Tom, or anything else, Sharky?
Just to kind of add a little bit of detail to, you shouldn't sell according to the value you offer. One caveat to that, though, is the more value legitimately that your product does offer, theoretically, the more you can sell, the more you can sell it for, provided you can get the imagination of that value into the consumer's mind. So that's another thing. You're like, man, this is a great value, but I can't get them to realize it. Well, you can by reducing the price, because then more people will buy it.
On that note, too, I should probably mention. I feel like we've mentioned this with you all before, but there's not a 1-to-1 ratio between price and units, and this is something I see a lot of developers seem to just they don't mention it, but they think that if they have the price, they sell double amount of units. And there is not a 1-to-1 relationship there. It's different for every game. It's all over the place. And sometimes they think if they double the price, they'll have as many users as sell. That's not true either. So like sometimes you could double the price and sell the same amount of units. Sometimes you could double the price and sell 70% of the same units. However that works, like it takes a lot of like research and stuff to figure out with your own game, and you can never get it right the first time on launch without luck. But it's stuff that you can kind of figure out afterwards and where your sweet spot is. But that's another thing that I should probably mention real quick, because I see that come up a lot in just assumptions and how pricing works, but it's not really true.
Yeah, it's the same. Oh, go ahead.
Sometimes you can double your price and not sell anything.
Yeah, and it's the same element we see when we talk about the quantity within a game. That some developers think that, oh, if I add 500 more levels to my game, 5 times the amount, it'll get 5 times the reviews, or it'll be 5 times better. And again, it's not 1-to-1 at all.
Sometimes you can make it worse. You added too many levels.
Oh, yes. Let's see. The next question that came up from Ford. What do you guys think of having your first game for free, no microtransactions, in order to build an audience when you're trying to be a professional developer? And I have some thoughts on this, but I'll let the roundtable go first on this.
Oh, I mean, if you can afford to sell your game for free to get more of a user base, then be my guest. But then if that's the case, you have a lot of other flexibility at that point.
That's another assumption too, though, right? Do you see that in the actual text? Give your first game for free to build an audience. You're not guaranteed an audience from that game. That's an assumption that you're making, that you're going to get an audience by giving your game for free. And you're making an assumption that you're going to get more of an audience with less of a price, which is not true either. There's a lot of assumptions there. And that's what I was pointing out, is like these assumptions are not true. And you can get, like, Among Us. Look at that game, right? 2 years later, or whatever it was, they got 100 million people. Okay, 100 million people. Nowhere did they factor that into their decisions. I can guarantee you that. Like, nowhere were they, well, if we get 100 million people, this is what we'll do. Like, they weren't thinking about that as far as pricing goes. Their pricing is all over the place. It's free on mobile, but it's $4.99 on Steam, and it's like, it's weird. And if anybody were to ask me if that was a good idea, I'd be like, no, that's just it's awkward. But like, I can't say anything about what they did because they're like off the charts, right? So like, it's just weird. I wish there was like a answer I could just give people, but it's just kind of, it depends.
Yeah, it depends is probably the best answer because like you could potentially put out a game for free and potentially get a very large audience. But you can put it out for free and get nobody too. You may have gotten more of an audience if you charge $15 for it.
Some people may not pick it up specifically because it's free.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Well, I mean, at the same time, I think you can generally say that you might get more eyes, but what if you only got like 10% more eyes for putting it out for free? See, because one of the side effects of free is that people don't care. And so they might take a look, but you don't get to have them as audience member. You got a download. And sometimes, so I mean, in mobile, there was a period of time where you could cart around a large download count and potentially get work, honestly. But yeah, it by itself is I would generally recommend against it if you had the chance. That if it's good enough that it can gather an audience by being free, then it's good enough to gather an audience for a price.
Yeah, but what about when it lacks in aesthetics? When it's just like text on a screen, like a Twine game kind of thing.
But at free, are more people going to download it? I think at that point, right now, you have a genre audience limitation. There's just not a ton of people maybe that want that game right now. And so if anything, you could charge more for it because those people who are in such a small niche as gamers, they pick up whatever shows up in that genre.
So something happened to me recently. I was I started playing Forager because it was on Game Pass, and I really, really enjoyed that game.
Oh,
But immediately I wanted it on mobile, right? And so I started looking for like mobile Forager-esque games. And I was downloading a free one, gave it 10 seconds. Nope, not what I wanted. Download another free one, gave it 10 seconds. Nope, not what I wanted. And then I found the game called Crashlands, which I'd heard of before. But it was $4.99. And I'm like, oh, well, all these other ones are free. So finally I was like, all right, I'll buy it for $4.99. But then because I paid for it, I put at least an hour into it before I even chose to judge it, right? Whereas all those other games only got 10 seconds. That's all they got. They might have been better games. I don't know. But my brain was just like, nope, next one, next one, next one. Whereas like when I actually spent the $5, I put the time into it. So that can happen too.
Sunk cost policy.
Yep. And yeah, like regarding this point, I think I agree with Tim and Tomo that putting your price at free doesn't automatically guarantee there's going to be people get eyes on it. And I think I remember this discussion that like my friend Ken and I, we were at this was an IGDA meeting. This was in Pennsylvania like 6-7 years ago with like a lot of students, a lot of first time developers, and we're sitting there and they all of a sudden they got in this discussion about how much to price your game. And like the majority of them said, I don't care about pricing my game. I don't care if people pirate my game. As long as people play, I'm happy. And like Ken and I gave like each other like the look of, what the hell are these people talking about? Like, we were like across the room from each other. Like we had like a silent conversation that way. And I think the problem is that if you're thinking about your game as free or as zero, you're not necessarily thinking about what it means to build a product or build something that you intend to sell. And I think Tim and I think we had this discussion a long time ago about, people, and as you just said, people will put more value to something if there is a price tag to it. And I think we had the exact same conversation with Shark on Sunday that I said that if you price your game at free, a lot of people are going to say, what the hell is wrong with this? Why are you giving me this game for free? There has to be a catch. There has to be something horrible about it. And like we've said, a lot of this is about showing people that your game has value to it. That, if your game is priced at $2, $5, whatever, that there is a reason to spend that amount of money on it.
Yeah, and I think it's something that if you haven't put thought into it, it's a surprise. But when you think about it, it makes perfect sense. And it's the idea that economics is a field of psychology.
Yeah, it is.
Yep.
And so it's a measure of human behavior, not a measure of math. It is not statistics, right? The value that drives the planet is all about head. Ooh, did I lose somebody?
I think we
Yeah, I think
lost
we lost Tim.
Tim. Uh-oh.
It's
And
all
now,
about head games.
now Tomo
Perfect.
is Tim.
Am I okay? Am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible. Your picture
okay,
is
so-
just swapped.
You're just
Oh
Tim now.
yeah, it got moved
Oh,
aside.
wait. There we go. He's back.
Yeah, just that the concept of value that drives all of the money on Earth is built on human behavior, not on other things. And so when we get caught up in, like, certainly the concrete feeling of something's value is going to influence my willingness to purchase it. But you have to look to the work that's been done in economics that identifies that people don't behave according to your sense of logic. And frankly, any one person's sense of logic, probably highly flawed in a number of ways, my own included.
Projection is speaking of assumptions, that's another thing that a lot of people don't really understand the concept of. I would never pay $30 for that game. Does not mean they would never pay $30 for that game,
Yep.
or someone else would never pay. A lot of people have trouble separating those out because they're so wrapped up in here. But it's very true. Like, you cannot project your own thoughts and feelings and emotions and the way that you see the world onto somebody else, especially when it comes to something like pricing. There are people that just have way more money than they have time, and there are people that have way more time than they have money, and
Yep.
it's why the free-to-play model
Exactly.
works out well with grinding, right? Because they're both player types.
Yep, and Tim actually beat me to the punch with that one. Like, again, like, there are people who play mobile games that they will spend thousands of dollars in the span of 10, 20 minutes. I was watching people play Genshin Impact that came out last month, or I think it was this month. Like, there are streamers who they just sat there and I watch them. They just spend like $8,000 in the span of 20 minutes. I'm like, no, I would never ever do that. Like, I would be like the worst mobile streamer because people would be like, Josh, spend money. You gotta buy that loot box. I'm like, no, I'll just grind for the next 10 hours on the stream for it.
But I think the big difference is they might have spent $8,000, but they probably during that few minutes, but they probably made $10,000 or $20,000 in their few minutes too.
Well, I mean, for the most part, some people get into shopping, right? And what is it they're getting into when they get into shopping? Getting into spending money. That can be its own driver of joy all by itself.
Oh yeah, you definitely have dopamine and all that stuff flowing through you when you're doing all the shopping.
And again,
I know people that have shopping as a hobby, which I never understood how that could be a hobby, but some people consider it one.
No, man, I'm the same way. And someone earlier brought up, like, when we talk about this idea of, like, psychology of pricing, they brought up brand recognition. And brand recognition is huge, especially when it comes to video games. Again, like what we've said, like, there's a Nintendo tax, right? That, any Nintendo game gets like $10 to $20 extra because it comes from Nintendo. And we see this, like, especially among like the indie developers who do make it, like Clay. I think New Blood is getting up there. What was it, Kid Fox as well? That when you are recognized as a high quality studio, it affords you that higher price because people come to expect that level of quality. Like, again, with Nintendo, it is rare to see a first party Nintendo game come out at $20. Because they could probably sell that game like gangbusters. But they'll probably sell that same game like gangbusters for $40 or $60.
They could probably even do 100.
Yeah.
Well, that's the other thing too, is if you survive long enough, you'll have gathered a certain amount of information, and then there's a lot less guesswork, right? It's like part of brand recognition is actually brand history. And they're like, our brand just happens to be the cheap brand. It's cool. But that's not Nintendo, right? Nintendo would never sell anything for less because you're like, yeah, doesn't it feel irresponsible to charge less than what people will actually kind of want to pay for it?
Let's see. Another question that came up earlier from Will. He asked, do you think it's ethical if you sell a game to put a Patreon on your website for general ongoing development? Could this create an unhealthy relationship with the consumer?
It's a
I think
choice.
making the option. Yeah, I'm gonna let Tim say it.
I was just gonna say, like, I don't think it's unethical if they have the choice whether to support the Patreon or not, right? I like at any time they can stop. It's I don't think ethically that's the problem. I think it might change how they perceive the game, right, with ongoing updates and stuff like that, and that could be its own issue. But ethicality, if that's a word, I don't think is part of the consideration there.
Okay.
And I totally agree with that.
So, I guess, getting back to some more like general parts about like this pricing, I guess one thing that I wanted to kind of bring up with the table is the idea of, is the idea of like comparative pricing, because this has been brought up in chat several times. Yeah, and I'm sure you guys have done this as well. That you look at, obviously, as we said, there is no magic, checklist that will let you decide. Okay, if I have this, this, and this in my game, it's worth this amount of money. And one thing that developers do, and I'm sure consumers do as well, is compare games to each other. What's one platformer worth to another? Real-time strategy, RTS, and so on and so forth. So, as we've said, it's very hard, like, with so much of the emotion that goes with kind of buying or the economy of this. What do you think about that idea of, game comparison when it comes to pricing? Is it as effective as people might think it is?
Well, the thing with the game comparison is I think most of that would happen before they bought it, kind of thing. So when they're comparing trailers and screenshots, gifs on the store page. You're judging the aesthetics of the game, the editing of the trailer, the work that's gone on into making the Steam page and everything, and not the game itself, kind of thing. And I think that's where it's very important that you have all that stuff in order as best as you can in order to actually get anywhere as of sales, because when that comparison goes down, like, and they may not even be comparing like your platformer compared to another. They may just be comparing your information, everything you're displaying, everything you're telling them, to the price, to the hurdle that's in front of them to get them into it, versus what they feel the quality is based off of everything that you can show them.
I think I agree with that statement, but I'd just like to add one thing to that, is that there when there is something like you out there for sale, it's like information that you can act off of, right? Think of it as like a piece of cover you can take. Right, the way to think about that is like, oh hey, this is great that they're selling their game for so much. I could draft off of them, perhaps. Maybe I should be selling my game for just 15% less. I mean, normally, if it wasn't for them, I would totally charge less because I'd be nervous. But because they're there, and now I can just cut in right underneath them, and it's like, yeah, we're the cheap version, and I'm charging double what I would have done otherwise.
On top of that one, I've seen a lot of developers get together for bundles of
Oh yeah.
my games. There's a roguelike bundle, there's a hidden object bundles, puzzle, platformers, you name it. And I'm curious about, I would love to know, do those work as well as it looks like they do from the outside? That, we have 2 games or 4 games priced at $20 a piece, or just put into a bundle and maybe take 10-15% off of that, if that leads to getting sales.
As far as I know from the stories I've heard, bundles are a good way to increase your user base, because they'll basically, there's all these new vectors and new audiences or new types of eyes, right, that are looking not for you, but you'll come with. So if you want to get install base up, that it's a great move, but inevitably you're going to be making a lot less money than otherwise. So do so carefully, and it's not a kind of thing that it's not a leading strategy; it's a trailing strategy.
Also, you sacrifice the drop off rate when that happens too, because like I know Josh has done videos recently about the drop off rates on achievements and playtime and all that stuff, and when you're selling the game to somebody who wasn't specifically looking for it, you're going to probably have a lot higher drop off rate.
Financially too, I have a lot of friends who've done stuff like Humble Bundle, and they all tell me kind of the same thing, is that like generally they make big chunks of money, but they make much less per like unit sold, and generally they're less interested, right? But they seem to be really good at like generating a large amount of volume for like less per unit sale.
Yeah. And like I've heard that as well. Like the general strategy for going Humble Bundle is, as like Tomo said, that you're not going to be making millions of dollars off a Humble Bundle, no matter how successful that bundle was. And it is more about getting that user base grown with it. And I think Ryu said in chat, if you're going to do bundles with games, they should be at least 5 years old, because once you put your game on that bundle, that's going to be kind of like the end, I think, of a lot of like new users at that point.
You get a lot of key resellers too from that kind of stuff.
Oh yes.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see. Another question. Ford asked this: how specific do you get when doing market price research?
I guess the question is, what do you mean by specific?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think for us, like we were taking genre, whether it's story rich or not. Let's see, what were some of the other criteria? Theme, and putting tons of Steam titles into categories, and looking at their price variables and trying to see what was one part of the reasoning behind why people were choosing their prices, and two, which choices were being rewarded. And so it got pretty specific, I guess, and that's not a great answer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think in general, and this is in general, you can't do too much research. But I mean, you technically can if you just obsess about it and just stick completely on that for no reason. But like, you need to put a good bit of time into this. Because like this research is so important to getting your game out there and hopefully making it successful, kind of thing. So you definitely need to put a good bit of time and effort into this. Don't just put like a week into it and just think you're good, kind of thing. Like this needs to be kind of treated almost like a Kickstarter kind of thing, where you put and not these Kickstarters you just throw up there and they flaunt, they fail, but these successful Kickstarters, because like there's a lot of work that goes into that over a long period of time. Maybe not as much work as a Kickstarter, but as a really good top level Kickstarter, but definitely you need to put a good bit of work into it, because like you need proper research, like Tomo said, and you don't need to examine every single game on Steam, because that's going to take forever. You don't need to examine every game that's out there, but you need to get a good enough foothold into the market, and specifically the current market, not the market from 10 years ago or anything like that. You can't really compare yourself to old markets, because those are old numbers that really don't apply today.
I kind of came at this from two different angles. So with Phylophobia, on one hand, it's a platformer. You do research, you get a $10 or $15 price for most 5-hour platformers. It's pretty common. Most of them don't do well. I looked at that and I said, okay, that's what it is. On the other hand, it's this deep, dark, emotional game that's based on depression. It's based on the 5 stages of grief. It's based on hell. It's got this religious symbology. It's got this dark, oppressive symbology. It's got every part of me in it that I don't even want to be there, really. It makes me uncomfortable. And there's a completely different audience from that. And from that perspective, there's nothing else like it, right? There's nothing else that's got as much of me in it. There's nothing else that's got this perfect mix of all these different things. And that's where the Founders Edition came in. The people that really resonated with that wanted a bigger version. They wanted like a deeper investment. They were willing to pay more for those different things. And so I think, how specific do you get on research? I don't really think I think that's too general of a question. I think that question itself needs to be more specific, kind of like Tomo alluded to. I think ultimately I went with 11.99 just because I was like, it felt right. But I did have a $66 version that I sold, and it sold, I think, pretty well. It was the majority of my sales, as it was like 70% of my sales actually, as far as like gross dollars. So it worked out pretty well, and that was based on a very small version of the audience.
Yeah, I think what you did there was really good with the multiple packages and giving people more, because I think that could pretty much benefit any game, honestly.
Especially games that do have like multiple audiences and stuff like that. Because like I said, I really did come at it from both angles. The people that were there for the emotional journey and the deep dark stuff that was there, and those were for the platforming challenges, right? And they're willing to pay very different things, right? Because they want different things out of the game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I have kind of like a two-part question I want to ask everyone. I want to start with this one, and this is also for the chat as well. I was thinking about this idea of, that, as we said, like a lot of the pricing or like a lot of the psychology of it is kind of like at an individual level. Some people feel if they feel a game resonates with them, they're going to spend that money instantly. So I wanted to ask, do you remember like the last time you bought a game or played a game that you felt, honest and true that you got your money's worth out of it? Because I'm honestly having a hard time thinking about that. Now, again, though, I'm the weird exception because I get a lot of my games for free. I have so many games in my backlog. But, like, for developers and for the consumers watching this, I just want to know what your thoughts are on that.
I can go first.
Sure.
Okay, so I can just go through a list, and I can tell you the games that I got my money's worth out of and didn't. And inevitably, the ones the ones that I did, they're not that. It's not an interesting list, because it's like, oh yeah, well, I like that game, and maybe some of you wouldn't or whatever. But the thing is, the games that I haven't gotten my money's worth yet. That's the part that I want to talk about. So, and I gave it away by saying yet. I can still go back to them. The question is whether I was unhappy that I spent the money. And I have occasional I have buyer shame over something, but only games that I played a bit, found that I did not like a lot. And so after that fact, now I'm like, I don't really feel like I'm going back to that game. I didn't put a lot of time into it. I'm a little upset that I bought it. That happens occasionally. But the vast majority of the games that I have yet to get my money's worth out of, and maybe there's not enough time in the rest of my life to do so, they're still on deck. I'm still interested in, and I'm still thinking about, at some point, will occasionally think about going back and getting in there and digging out that value. And then once in a while, I have games that are just in the sidelines. I picked it up. Someone said something interesting about it, and in some weird sort of way, I want to play it to understand what they mean when they make a certain kind of recommendation. And then, of course, the easy category, like I said, is all the games that I did get my money's worth out of. It's like, yeah, I played them a bunch. I had a great time. It's like, I probably should have spent more. I mean, unless it was like, well, even like Warframe and World of Tanks, and maybe not World of Warcraft, because I did put a lot of money into that in the grand scheme of things. Like some of those games, which in some ways are free to play, if I put enough time into them and got enough enjoyment out of them, I still haven't put enough money into them, even if I am kind of like a little bit of a baby dolphin for both Warframe and World of Tanks.
I'm gonna answer quickly, but then I've got like a more longer answer. So I think the Halo 2 and Destiny, I both got plenty of money for my time invested, hundreds and hundreds of hours in those games. But I think more recently, for the last couple of years, I've kind of been wondering, like, there was a point where I was like, I'm a game developer, but do I really like games? Because I don't play a lot. And I was kind of like, what's going on with it? Like, is this okay? Is this ethically okay for me to not be a gamer, but to be a game developer? But then Game Pass came around, and I signed up for Game Pass, and I noticed that I play so many more games when they're on Game Pass. And I realized that maybe I'm a little price sensitive. I just don't want to go around spending 10, 20, 30 bucks all the time to try out these games. So I'm not even really interested, really. Very rarely would something catch my eye. But with Game Pass, I'm like, oh, well, I'm going to download this. I'm download that. I'm going to download this. Like 5 in a row and just go through the list and just try them all out. And I found some really cool games that I never would have thought of. Like Forager was one of them. Like I probably put at least 20 or 30 hours in that game. And that was a game I never really considered because I didn't think I would like the genre. But I liked that game so much that I played it multiple times. And I went searching on mobile for other games similar to it. Right. And because of that lower barrier to entry and I think it's the trust in like Microsoft too, that there's quality games in Game Pass that even though there's only 100, 150 or whatever, I generally think that they're going to all be better games. It's made me play a lot more. So I don't know if Game Pass counts as an answer. That's a cheating answer, but I definitely have gotten my money out of that. And because I got so much value out of it, I've just bought Years Everywhere, the year subscription, because I think I'm going to see it for a very long time.
Yeah. For me, like 7 Days to Die is like my top because like I have put nearly 2,000 hours into that game, and I have gotten my money's worth probably 2,000 times over because like I just love it so much and everything. But like when we talk to more recent games, like I'm really glad I bought Among Us. Like Among Us is a controversial game to a lot of people because it's everywhere and it's super popular and everything, and it's definitely a thing to hate on something because it's popular, because a lot of the popular stuff tends to not be very good, But like the Among Us, I think it's a really solid game. It's just, it's got some really big pain points about you need to have friends that on like a Discord in voice chat talking to have it really be fun, because if you're just playing out in public and everything, with the text chat, it's really not fun at all, kind of thing, at least to me anyway. But like I feel like I have gotten my money's worth out of that to a large degree, even though I've only played it, I don't know, 2 or 3 nights, but it has been tremendous fun in the times I've played it, mainly because of the social aspect to it. And building games with social aspect are a completely other animal. But like another game recently I played was Final Upgrade, which is sort of along the lines of Factorio kind of thing, but with spaceships and everything. And it's quite different at the same time than Factorio, but like it has a lot of the Factorio vibes, and it just came out in early access, and it definitely went into early access too soon because it definitely really bad on onboarding, UI, and all that stuff. But like, despite all those pain points and everything, like the gameplay was just so engrossing and so engaging and just so good that I have just played the heck out of it. And that being said, I've enjoyed it so much, and I barely even played the game because like, not as of time wise, but as of getting progress, because there are 3 enemy factions in that game that you're supposed to beat and everything. And I haven't even fought one of them. I have not even engaged in ship combat one single time. And I've just had so much fun, building ships and getting the logistics down and, min-maxing my designs, building a freaking Star Destroyer or in it, and now I'm building a Death Star in it, and it's just crazy amounts of fun, and I really got that out of it. But like games that like I didn't get like I felt like I overpaid and stuff was like what was the name of that game, or what was the name of those games rather, because it was a trilogy of sorts. I am blanking on the name of that, but basically the reason why, like, I really enjoyed the game, like the gameplay was really solid and everything. The thing that really got me was that I bought their first 3 games, and the first game was just a prototype for the second game, which was just a, like Alpha 5 for the third game, which was the actual real game kind of thing. So it's like I paid 3 times for, 2 for the prototypes and 1 for the real game. It's like, there's some issues there. And, I did put a good bit of time on it, but I paid for 3 games to get that one game. And despite me getting, I think one of them for $1 and another one for like, the second for like $2 or $3, and then paying like $15 for the real game, I still feel really ripped off kind of thing, because I mean, that was, 3 different games I bought, but like I would have paid $25 for the full one, the real one. But yet I feel ripped off paying $22 for all 3 of them because of how they were done. And I can't really quantify that into words, how that actually, figures out. But like for me, my mind's like, I bought 3 games, but I only got 1, and it didn't really matter that it was a total price I paid for the 3, but rather just that I did buy 3 games and I only got 1.
Shark, I'm curious. When you say you feel ripped off, is that literally what you mean? Like you actually feel ripped off? Like you feel like an injustice? Or do you just feel like, I wouldn't do that if I could go back and change it?
I would have definitely not bought the first 2. I would have just bought the third one.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Because I can't say I've ever really felt ripped off by buying a game. Like sometimes I bought games and I'm like, oh, these aren't for me, but that's fine. Yeah. Sometimes, like back in the day, I preferred it when you could buy used games and just take them back to GameStop. That was the only way that I really would ever play. Because I usually wouldn't risk $60 or something on a new game if I didn't know anything about it.
Yeah, the only times I felt that way was back in the old transition from PlayStation 1 to PlayStation 2 era. And basically all games are like $50-$60, and then you get in the habit of buying them, and then once in a while you'll get something, you'll be like, whoa, this is really bad, and then you'll feel ripped off. And it was kind of pre GameStop, so it's not like I could even do anything about it.
And before I get to my thoughts and the next question, I just want to do a quick time check. It's about 7:45 my time, so we were shooting for around 8 o'clock to wrap this up. So
yeah, that works for me.
So go ahead.
No, I was just saying last few questions, and I should probably go.
Yeah. So for the chat, this is going to be officially last call for questions for the panel right now. So, on this topic, few people brought some of the games that I played. I think I definitely put so much time into stuff like Monster Hunter World being a really good example. But then I think about what Shark said about Final Upgrade, and remind me a lot of how I felt about XCOM 2. I bought XCOM 2 in the expansion full price, day 1, played them immediately they came out, and I barely made any progress in them. Part of it was because I played on the higher difficulty, so I was getting killed by bad RNG, but I just had so much fun and so much enjoyment just taking apart these systems. Like the stuff they had with War of the Chosen was just amazing for me. But I have yet to actually finish a campaign in XCOM 2. I just spent so much time playing it, getting killed, restart, and just soaking in that game. And it just reminded me a lot of what Shark was saying about just the base concept, enjoying it so much that you don't really need to see anything else, or you're not even ready to get there, you're just enjoying that level. And I think Factorio scratches that itch as well, that you could certainly play that game and go all the way down the tech tree, or you could just go, Rube Goldberg-esque mad in terms of designing assembly lines in it.
Speaking of XCOM 2, that's actually a really interesting example for pricing
Mhm.
because it's coming to iPad, iOS for $24.99, which is as far as I know, that's the most expensive iPad game I've ever seen. I could be wrong about that, but
There was
I
a,
thought
a
it was interesting.
military strategy game for $40 for a while back.
Really, I
They
would
just
love to
charged the
talk to
same
Gamedev
that they
about
charged it with. It's military strategy. They live in a black and white TV era. I love those games to
XCOM,
death, but
because even XCOM 1 is $5 on iOS, which seems like iOS price.
yeah,
Right?
totally.
But then XCOM 2 is going to be $24.99, which I totally think is worth it. I would still buy it because I bought the whole collection on Xbox and I bought it again on PC. Like I've bought it several times now, so I think it's worth it. But it's interesting, especially with what happened with Chimera Squad. That's another example we should talk about pricing because they launched at 50% off. That
Yeah.
was a weird thing that threw a lot of people off.
I think they got a lot of straight out the opening day sales though because of it.
Mm-hmm.
That was, man, I would love to talk to some of these people. Just
Yeah.
figure out the psychology. Like, what were you trying to do? Was
And
that
how
a
did it
typo?
go?
5% off? Did somebody add a 0? Yeah, and how did it go? Exactly.
And I guess here's the second part of this, and this will kind of be my final question. We'll see if this takes us to time or if anything else comes up. And this was, and Pony and Chadley kind of beat me to this when he brought up not wanting to refund a game that he played, Barbarian. And I wanted to bring this because we had this discussion on our Sunday show about the 2 hour period. That a lot of people these days feel that if a game doesn't have at least 2 hours of content, it's not going to get its money's worth. And part of that, of course, has to do with the whole Steam refund policy, or just a refund policy in general. And again, like this is something that, 10 years ago, we weren't having this conversation. You buy a game on Steam, it is yours. It doesn't matter if you play it for a minute or for 100 years. You're never getting that game off your account. These days, and I've done this myself, I bought a game, see how it goes for 2 hours. If it annoys me or if I don't like it, it gets refunded. And, no muss, no fuss. So I wanted to ask everyone, what are your thoughts about this idea of the 2 hour window or the 2 hour, bar that games may have to clear these days?
I don't think it's all that big of an issue as long as you either do one of two things. You either have a game that's long enough, the quality still has got to be there to get well over that threshold. Like if you're like a 3-4 hour game, I think you're pretty good as long as it's a good 3 or 4 hours. But if you're shorter than 2 hours, I mean, I think your game needs to be really content rich and really impactful and just be on its A game the entire time because you really have to, because again, you have to get the individual that's playing your game to feel like your game was worth it in that short of time of whatever the price was. Of course, the lower the price, the less they have to feel like it's worth it kind of thing. But I think that it really needs to be content rich and just, you need to basically really, have like them really love the game in that short time to make up for the time.
Yeah, I don't really see that mattering at all because if you have a great game, people aren't. I mean, they might remember it's short, but they're going to have a really good experience, right? If you have a bad game, they're not going to play that long anyway. If you have a mediocre game, giving them more of a mediocre game is probably not a good idea. Like that's just going to pad out the experience, right? So like I think like there are 2 hour games that are like wow, like they really like that was a beautiful experience, right? Like I played The Room. You guys ever play some of those games? They're like escape room puzzle games. Those are really really cool to play. They're pretty short, but like I feel I come out of that game feeling like wow, that was a really cool little experience, right? I don't think of it as like short, and I I don't think that there should be a threshold. I think if you're at a point where you're saying like, oh, well, I want to get this over the refund time, I don't think that's going to make the difference. I think people enjoying your game is going to make the difference of whether or not they refund it. Not so much like, oh, well, if this had an hour more content, I wouldn't have refunded it. I could be wrong though.
Well, I agree with you for the most part, because like it's more about how long the player plays rather than the play time, the total play time. But that said, is there are people out there that, you know, are more on the questionable side and will, you know, like if they can find a game that's an hour long, will go all the way through it and then they'll refund it. And there's pretty much nothing you can do about that other than having a longer game kind of thing. But like, if your game is only going to be an hour long or whatever, it needs to be really, really good during that hour. It can't be just good. It needs to be.
I would tell them that up front too. If I was going to sell an hour-long game, I would make that very clear on the Steam page.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
When for everyone who actually has like discipline enough to play it for that hour and then return it, there's probably like 99 others, right, that didn't even open the game for 6 months.
Probably.
Yep.
And yeah, if a game is, I mean, I don't know what it's like, or I can't really imagine making a game that would take less than an hour. But I think I probably should think about that more. So it's hard for me to have kind of an opinion about whether or not you should do that, because I don't know how to do that.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you guys about this, that ultimately, if your game is good, whether it is 40 minutes, 40 hours, whatever, if it's a great game, I think most people are going to be willing to support you. I think this thing goes back to this kind of like psychology of the economics of things. If your game is horrible, more horrible doesn't make it better. And like this is something that when I do my weekly indie spotlights, like we've played many games that within the first 10 minutes, I am hating this game. Like it is not working for me. I don't care what's happening. Like this is a one and done game. Then there are some games that I play that I really like within that 10 to 20 minute span, I'm like, you know what? I'm in for this. And at that point, it's like, I'm going to play this game to the end, whether it is, you know, another 40 minutes, another 20 hours. You know, if you hook me at the beginning, you got me for the long haul at that point.
I see messaging issues with this too. Like I've seen developers that have made games where they're like, oh, it's too short, so I'd have to add a bunch of stuff in the middle. Right? And they actually, one, they make it a worse game most of the time because they're just artificially trying to pad the game's time. But two, in my opinion, sometimes what you should do is just embrace the fact that you made a 2-hour thing. Put that in the messaging as a benefit. Don't try and hide the fact that your game is short, right? Just say, guys, this is a 2-hour game. You don't have to spend 80 hours on this. You can do this in one sitting. Right, like play it like a benefit. Don't like
it's
try.
A goddamn selling point.
Exactly. If you try and hide it and make it all weird, then they're gonna be like, oh, well, then you can teach people how to think about your product. That's what messaging is. That's what copywriting is. That's what marketing is about, right? And I think a lot of people don't understand that, so they try and hide some of those things. And by doing that, that's what gets you the refunds, because then you're like, this game is not that short. It's kind of long, and then they play it and they're like, it's not what I signed up for, right? And then it's their experience is different than what you sold them, and that's where they feel cheated.
Yeah, but then there's genre expectations too, to where like if you're making a RPG kind of thing, like people generally expect it to be longer, but you can't you don't want to pad out your game. Now that does not mean that you shouldn't recycle content kind of thing, because like, you know, recycling content is the efficient way to do it. I mean, like Tim I think has become somewhat of a master of taking one piece of content and making it do so many different things, and just, you know, applying it in so many different ways and making all the, you know, the game depth through like the minimum amount of work through the basically recycling process kind of thing. And I think that's really, really great and everything. And, that's definitely something you should strive for, at least to some point, to save workload and make a better game at the same time. But I mean, you shouldn't be doing that just for the sake of doing it. You should be rather doing it to make the most out of a little rather than doing it to just make more out of something kind of thing.
To round this out, sometimes I actually think less content is better. So I designed 350 some levels for Phalophobia. It shipped with like 106. And I think that made it a tighter, better game. I could have padded out that game time quite a bit, but I didn't. And it's weird to me because I see reviews where some people have like 60 hours into Phalophobia. That's a 5-hour game, and I don't understand that. I don't know what you do. You must have left that on overnight or something. But like, yeah, it's an interesting little subject.
Maybe they just played through so many times because it was such a tight experience.
And Tim, could you put the name of your game in chat? Because I think a few people may want to look that up. And yeah, we are knocking on time. I guess just very quickly, one question came in, and I think this will officially end it after this one. And I think Tomo kind of already started the answer. Sin asks, do you have an opinion on people releasing games for free and then deciding to tack on a price or at in-game purchases once the game gets popular instead of right out of the gate? And I think ultimately, like with these kinds of talks, I think Tomo says as well, like, you should have your monetization idea, your monetization plan, during development. Because ultimately that's going to make your game stronger for it. Because we have seen developers who will either have no content, they have no plan, and then the game blows up and it's like, what do we do now? Or they'll have like pages and pages of DLC right out of the gate, nobody buys it, and it's like, oh, what else are we going to do? We have no money coming in.
Yeah.
I've seen developers make novels and art books and all kinds of stuff for their game that nobody wants.
Oh, yes.
That's an overscoping issue. That's an issue for another time, probably.
But yeah, I think the entire indie movement probably started from the essential nugget that I'm not in it for the money. And it's okay if you're not. And I wasn't in it for the money at first either. But, these decades later, if you're afraid of money or you see money as ugly or dirty, you're really deeply missing the point. And if my words right there kind of stung or somehow, you feel some emotional resistance, I felt that way when I would have heard the same things like 15 years ago. But whatever that is wrong as hell. Money and trading money and giving things for money and getting that money is just us communicating what we like. And I think it's really important to keep that in mind.
Yeah,
money makes it sustainable too. Sorry.
Yeah,
like you can keep doing it if you can pay the bills with it.
Yep.
Like I'm not in it for the money at all. Like I don't even intend to pay myself until the company, gets fully off the ground. Like I personally don't care about that for me personally. But that said, is I care about it for the company because I want the company to succeed so that I can keep on doing it, kind of thing. And I want this company to see it enough that I can do more stuff that I want to do, bigger stuff that I want to do, and better stuff that I want to do. And it's a ever climbing scale of we need more and more money, kind of thing. And I'm for the company getting all the money, but like it's not about money for myself. It's about money so I can make the games I want to make, kind of thing. It's basically just allowing me to do what I want to do, basically, rather than lining my pocket so I can buy a Lamborghini. Although I wouldn't mind having a Lamborghini.
Yeah, and I think that is where a lot of developers get into. I mean, it's the same thing for me. Like, there's a difference between chasing money to have it versus wanting money so you can support yourself and, grow. And as we've said many times on these roundtables and our Sunday shows, at the end of the day, the game industry is a business. If you're not earning money through your games, you're unfortunately not going to last long as a game developer. And a lot of this has to do, as we said, you have to wear many hats to succeed in this industry. And it can be hard for, I think, a lot of first time developers, as we said with the IGDA example earlier, that people who get in this industry, they don't often think about the money first. But at some point, you need to have that conversation with yourself about what am I really worth, or what is this actually worth it to people, and can I make a living off of it? And it's a tough conversation to be had by anyone.
Mm-hmm.
But we are right at time, so I guess very quickly, does anyone have any final thoughts before I kind of give you guys a chance to do the final plug for the night?
My only final thought is one of the topics for the next roundtable should be how do we develop towards making the best value for our customers? This is how this is the rationale of price, but the flip side of that, right, is how do we build value? And I think that that's a really worthy next conversation.
I'm down for that. I think my final statements is, out of all the scientific stuff we've talked about with pricing, I think at the end of the day, it's just you gotta kind of just pick one and go with it and see what happens. That's what I did.
Yeah, and I'm with Tim on that. Like I feel that, like despite all the research and everything, like in the end, the price was just arbitrary. Like there's so much that goes into it, but in the end, there's no clear right answer, no matter how much research you do, and it ends up being sort of arbitrary. But like that doesn't mean you don't need to put in the research, because you do.
All right. Yeah. And I think this was a really great cast as always. And yeah, talking about getting the value or how to put that value in your game, I think that's something a really good topic for next time. But with that, as always, has been a fantastic conversation with everybody. And I'd like to thank, of course, the chat for tuning in as well. So, as customary for these discussions, I want to let everybody go around one final time and do any plugs, Twitter, whatever. So we'll start once again with Tomo and work our way to the right.
All right. Thanks for having me, Josh. And you can find me on Twitter, Twitch, and Discord, all of which are related to Epic Tavern, the game that Hyperkinetic Studios, my studio, makes. And you can find our Twitch channel at twitch.tv/Epic Tavern, our Discord channel at discord.gg/Epic Tavern, and on Twitter we are at Epic Tavern.
All right, and Tim.
My name is Tim Ruswick. You can find my game Philophobia: The Fear of Love on Steam now. You can also wishlist Battleborn Tactics, which is a turn-based mini tactics roguelike on Steam as well. You can find me on Twitter at Tim Ruswick, Twitch at Tim Ruswick, and my game dev community, Game Dev Underground, on Discord. You can search that on Google.
I'm Sharky Shark, and you can find me on YouTube at Nexus Games LLC. You can find me on Twitter at Nexus Games LLC1 rather. And you can find me on Discord, where I have a small community there. And, we're making Neon Continuum, and you can see that across all various platforms kind of thing. But, you really get the most in-depth on Discord, and you should be able to find the link to that down below.
Yep. Uh-oh. We lost Tim again. We had the dimensional swap happen again.
We have the Tomo Tim.
There we go. Oh, there we go. There we go. I think Tim's just doing it to surprise everybody.
I'm just keeping everybody on those. It's funny, I've been disconnected for a long time when I forget I have a YouTube channel. for skipping on YouTube. I thought that was
Uh-oh.
Then I got lost in
Yeah, you're kind of breaking up there a little bit, Tim. I wonder. Could be.
That's a good thing we're ending.
Yeah. All right.
Used up all the bandwidth.
Yep.
Uh-oh.
And of course, I am Josh Beiser, and if you're watching this, then you either know about Game Wisdom, or I hope that you are subscribed. I'm on Twitter at GW Beiser, and we have, of course, our lovely Discord channel linked down below, where you can sign up, get updates about what's coming out, as well as talk game dev and game design topics with myself and with this panel and more people here. And you want to pick up my books on game design deep dive, platformers, roguelike, and 20 essential games to study, there are links down below to them. But I believe that is going to do it. So, I will be back later tonight for my regular game stream. We will be doing another roundtable, probably the third or fourth week of each month, so we'll be back in November. And again, I would like to thank our roundtable, Tomo, Tim, and Sharky on. Ideally, hopefully we get Jack on for next month's. But gentlemen, has always been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Bye, guys.
It's been fun.
See you
All right.
later.
Until next time, everybody, come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. And have a great rest of your night. Take care.